The natural world is truly an incredible paradise beyond comprehension.
Two of your favorite thinkers are also two of mine, and that's Rudolf Steiner and Charles Fort. I'm not aware of many people who seem to know them both as deeply as you do. How have the writings and ideas of these two fellows been incorporated into how you see the world?
Charles Fort and I have the same birthday, August 6th. I love Charles Fort's writings. I was exposed to Charles Fort by my friend Alan Steinfeld. We would go to his house every couple weeks and have a study group. It was always conspiracies, ufology, Bigfoot. It was always that kind of stuff. We just had fun. All the crew was there. He said to me one day, he said, "Have you ever heard of Charles Fort?" And I was like, "No." Like, you need to look at a Charles Fort. So I got Book of the Damned, Low, Wild Talents, and New Lands. What a revolutionary first section of the Book of the Damned. Then I started realizing, like, whoa, he's on to the science bullies. He understands scientism. He understands that they're trying to put this parasite religion on us, scientism, which has all this fake crap that's pushed in, and that all these truths are actually bullied in. And one of the great insights of Charles Fort was that, like science, for example, or scientism is trying to bully in their worldview by deleting and stuff. You don't look over here, but this, we're real. This, look here, we've got it figured out. It's so incredibly awesome what Charles Fort was able to do. He made a massive leap in philosophy. And to me, Charles Fort's philosophy is one of the most trite and one of the most phenomenal philosophies of all time, because you can never get to the all by deleting stuff. One of his great phrases, I love this phrase so much, I live by it, and that is, the pen is mightier than the sword, but the scissors are mightier than the pen. What we cut out, what we delete out, and just, whoa, we can't, don't look at this, get rid of that. Oh, I'm gonna cut that out, don't look at this. And that's the censorship culture that we live in right now. Don't look over there, because essentially the scientism is another fake structure that's going to be toppled and is held in place by bullying.
Well said. Steiner was also big on scientism and getting past a lot of that stuff and the experts. He has that quote, the future is going to be people led around with a white lab coat, scientists on one arm and a police officer on the other arm. Steiner called that out. I mean, same with Charles Fort. A century in advance, these people knew the direction that the world was going to go, and it's pretty amazing. And as for those things that have been cut out, what do you think are some of the most important things we should fold back in?
Well, one of the things that's so beautiful about our world is the paranormal. And that's where the magic is. That's where the inspiration comes from. So, for example, this idea that like, oh no, there can't be Bigfoot out there. Come on. I mean, there's tens of thousands of reports. I mean, what an absurdity. We got video, we got hair, we got scat samples, we've even got bodies. We got every bit of evidence you could ever want. And they still like, no, this can't exist, because either the person just unconscious and can't accept it, or the system itself is like, don't look there, because there's something they're trying to hide, and probably has something to do with our origins and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things I like to fold back in, is the Bigfoot conversation. And I also like to fold back in the magic of nature, where there's phenomenon that goes on in nature, hypersynchronicity, and the power of the vortex or the toroid as the creative force in nature is definitely something that needs to be folded back in. All the teachings of my favorite, Victor Schauberger, and his teachings on spring water and the importance of implosion, importance of the vortex, and how the creative force is a vortex. All that needs to be folded back in. What else? Well, we need to get completely back into all the anomalous stuff like ghosts, disincarnate entities, demonic entities, and fold that back in order to understand what's happening in our world, right? Because we can clearly see that there's a demonic invasion going on, and it takes its role and it takes its place inside the hosts of unconscious beings. People who have been fooled by scientism, essentially, and believe that there's no soul and you're an ape and all the nonsense that goes on. And so those beings are able to take control through that avatar. Here's another one we could fold back in, that actually the natural world is truly an incredible paradise beyond comprehension. Overwhelming in its beauty, overwhelming in the level of inspiration and insight, overwhelming in its ability to charge us up and bring us into pure health. All that could be folded in too.
Yes, I actually figured that the magic of nature would be one of the overarching themes to this, because it is guys like Steiner, Victor Schauberger, and Wilhelm Reich and Tesla who recognize this, and they should really be the Mount Rushmore of science and understanding of the natural world, I would say. Charles Fort, and Steiner too, had a lot of interesting ideas that, like, you hear them say some things and you're like, I don't even know how to incorporate that into my world. One of these is that Charles Fort is the one who coined the term teleportation originally. He would talk about these fish falls or these frog falls. We all know that there's these stories of fish or frogs falling from the sky. If you actually look on Wikipedia of all places, it happens more often than you realize. Almost once every other year, there's at least a concrete example of this happening. Even today, Charles Fort was like, hey, we're not gonna ignore this. This is a fact, a phenomenon. We have to now explain it. He thought it was teleportation by a cosmic trickster. He goes on to try to make some sense of it. And I've heard you talk about this, that this is part of maybe the magic of nature, that storms will actually be a vehicle to provide species that are needed in a certain area for a certain reason. That's kind of the gist of what he thought and how you interpret it, right?
You're right on. Steiner said that most dimensional doorways occur in the atmosphere. That's an important insight because I dug through Steiner to really find that information. Eventually he said most of the dimensional doorways are in the atmosphere. The latest fish fall, by the way, was in Texarkana, Texas. I think it was in March of 2021. If you look fish fall Texarkana on Twitter, for example, you'll see it, and you'll see that the fish are all the same size. There's nothing else with it. There's no seaweed, there's no frogs, there's no anything else. There's no small little fish, and they're all one fish of the same size. So that proves it's not some like whirlwind, because that's what a Fort would say. It'd be like, these people are trying to tell you that some whirlwind picked those fish up from some lake somewhere and then dumped them over here, which is just an insane absurdity. They're teleported in where they need to be to bring balance back to nature. And Fort also correlated that when nobody's looking, that's when this stuff usually happens. So he was talking about different types of insects in the UK that were missing. It was like 1927, 1928. As soon as nobody was looking, they appeared somewhere over the English Channel and then moved into England again. Suddenly they were back again. And he correlates all these weather journals and everything else. And he's basically showing you that when nobody's looking, all of a sudden, boom, they teleport in. So that's another interesting observation. And then I would say this, now we're getting on to something that is really interesting, which is, this brings up two issues for me that I finally arrived at after years of studying this stuff. One is nature teleports in what it needs, where it needs it, when it needs it. So the very core, in my opinion, of the whole chemtrailing and contrailing and just geoengineering is not actually weather modification, although that's happening, that's part of it. The main thing that's happening is that the demonic lower astral entity, Ahriman, and you know Ahriman from Steiner's writings, which is basically the Antichrist, as it comes to an incarnation, is trying to block teleportation. That's the real agenda of the contrailing or chemtrailing. It's trying to block the earth from healing itself. It'll teleport in what it needs, where it needs it, when it needs it, but the chemtrails block that from happening. If you really get into this, you really start studying teleportations, which previously known as fish falls or frog falls, you'll find something else and you'll start to realize that the core of the whole globalist agenda, the core of the Ahrimanic deception, the core of all the crap that was driven in, the carbon crap and all of it, is about extinction, right? This is extinct, that's extinct. Really? Show me. I don't believe you. I disagree. I can show you hundreds of animals that were said to be extinct. They're suddenly there again. Tasmanian wolf, the coelacanth, we can go on down the list. There's lists of this. And so the idea that things can go extinct is seriously in debate. Because maybe what happens is the force, God, source energy, teleports in what it needs, where it needs, when it needs it. So there is no such thing as extinction. This extinction concept, if you really dig into this, you're going to be like, oh man, this is the whole core of the whole damn thing. The whole guilt trip they throw on people. Oh, you're making things extinct. You can't do that. You can't do, you're extinct, going to go extinct. All that, going to go extinct. Really? I don't believe it.
This is really interesting. Definitely some fresh ideas. And it does make me think about the phenomenon of biodiversity, something I've always kind of been curious about. You take an area like the Amazon, If you really drill into that and just look at the species of birds, you can watch whole documentaries on the wild mating dance of these birds, and it's like completely foreign to any other thing in nature. And yet there's like 50 different birds with their own unique way of showing their plumage and doing some strange dance, and that exists nowhere else on the planet, so they say. You just start to wonder, well, where does biodiversity emerge from? Where does this new species come from? Because this whole evolution process is supposed to take millions of years, so that isn't exactly right. So where does a new species emerge from? It seems to be somewhat magical and somewhat out of the blue, if the conditions are right.
I looked into Steiner for that answer, and Steiner says basically something like this, that souls, when they're in the spirit world, work on these new organisms and new birds and basically manage to develop them for the physical world from the spirit world. That's Steiner's answer to that question, and that's probably the best answer that I've heard. I think about that a lot. So this idea that, we're going to wipe out that biodiversity, well, the biodiversity comes from the spirit world. This whole idea that there is no spirit world, well, that's why we have psychedelics. Psychedelics can instantly cure somebody of the belief that there's no spirit world. And that's a beautiful thing, right? And that's why it's there. When somebody goes into escapism and, then they're using psychedelics or cannabis to escape, well, then we have a problem. And they're falling, actually, in Steiner's terms, into a luciferic impulse or a luciferic deception where they're giving over their power and they're trying to escape. But if you go into this trying to create and you're like, I want to create, teach me, then you're finding out like, wow, the spirit world's just right here. It's always been standing room only all our lives, and sometimes we got brainwashed by that NASA crap of like, we're alone in the universe. That was a demonic, satanic scientism program. We're alone in the universe. It's so silly. The natural world is truly an incredible paradise beyond comprehension. Overwhelming in its beauty, overwhelming in the level of inspiration and insight, overwhelming in its ability to charge us up and bring us into pure health. All that can be folded into.